The sun hadn't yet risen when Hiroki pushed his small wooden boat into the gentle morning waves. At 72, his hands were rough and spotted with age, but they moved with the confidence of someone who had been fishing these waters for more than 60 years. The cool salt air filled his lungs as he settled onto the worn seat of his boat, the familiar smell bringing comfort, as it always did. The village of Minato still slept behind him. Only the occasional light from an early riser's window broke through the darkness. Hiroki preferred these quiet moments before the world woke up. Since losing his wife Yua 3 years ago, the silence had become both his burden and his friend. Another day on the water, he whispered to himself, a habit he'd picked up after Yua passed. Sometimes he imagined she could hear him. Somewhere, beyond the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Hiroki's boat, the Kasumi, wasn't much to look at. The blue paint had faded years ago, and despite his best efforts to maintain it, the wood showed its age just as his face did. But like him, it remained sturdy and reliable. He had refused his son's offers to buy him a newer boat with an engine. The sea deserves our respect, he would say, not our noise. His son Takeo lived in the city now, along with his daughter, May. They called often and visited when they could, but their lives were busy with jobs and families of their own. Hiroki understood. The world moved faster now than when he was young. Still, he missed seeing their faces more than a few times a year. The other fishermen in the village worried about him. Just last week, old Kenji had tried to convince him to take his nephew along on his fishing trips. "You shouldn't be out there alone, Hiroki," Kenji had said while they mended nets together on the dock. "What if something happens?" Hiroki had simply smiled. "The sea has had 60 years to take me if it wanted to. We understand each other now." As he rowed farther from shore, Hiroki watched the first hints of dawn touch the water. Pink and orange light danced across the waves, turning the ocean into a painting that no artist could truly capture. These moments alone with the sunrise made all the aches in his joints worthwhile. Most days Hiroki stayed within sight of the shore, fishing the familiar spots that had provided for him and his family for decades. But today, something felt different. Perhaps it was the unusual current, pulling slightly stronger than normal. Or maybe it was the way the seabirds circled farther out than usual. Whatever the reason, Hiroki found himself rowing beyond his regular fishing grounds. "Let's see what's out here today," he said to the Kasumi, as if the boat might answer. His small radio crackled with the morning weather report. Clear skies expected, with a slight chance of afternoon showers. Perfect fishing weather. By the time the sun had fully risen, Hiroki had reached a part of the coast he rarely visited. Rocky outcroppings rose from the water here, creating small, sheltered coves that might hide good fishing spots. The water was deeper too, a rich dark blue that promised different kinds of fish than his usual catch. Hiroki prepared his nets with practiced movements. His fingers, though not as nimble as they once were, still remembered every knot and fold. He cast the first net into the water, feeling the weight of it leave his hands. Then he waited, something he had become very good at over the years. Thigh, gentle rocking of the boat nearly lulled him to sleep. His mind wandered to memories of teaching young Takeo how to fish, of May's laughter when he brought home an especially strange-looking fish, of Yua's smile when he returned home each day. Good memories, even if thinking about them sometimes made his chest tighten with longing. A pull on his net snapped Hiroki back to the present. Something had been caught, and from the way the net strained, it was either something big or he had snagged on a rock. He began to pull, feeling the resistance. "Come on now," he grunted, leaning back and using his weight to counter the pull. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Whatever was in his net, it was heavy. For a moment, Hiroki considered cutting the net loose. At his age, he shouldn't be straining himself this way. But curiosity got the better of him, as it often did. Inch by inch, he hauled the net toward the surface, his arms burning with the effort. When he finally saw what was causing such resistance, Hiroki gasped. Breaking the surface of the water was a clam unlike any he had ever seen. Its shell was massive, at least 3 feet across, with ridges and patterns that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. In his decades of fishing, he had never encountered anything like it. With one final effort, Hiroki managed to get the enormous clam into his boat. It landed with a thud that shook the small vessel. Up close, the clam was even more impressive. Its shell had a pearly sheen that caught the sunlight, reflecting blues and greens like the ocean itself. Hiroki knew that giant clams were protected in many places. He had no intention of harming it. His plan was to document his find with the small camera his grandchildren had given him for his birthday, then release the creature back to the depths. But as he examined it more closely, he noticed something odd. The clam wasn't moving or showing signs of life. Its shell was partially open, something a living clam would never do when disturbed. "You've already had your time, haven't you?" Hiroki said softly, running a weathered hand over the ridged surface of the shell. He felt a strange connection to this ancient creature. Perhaps they were not so different. Both old, both shaped by the sea. Hiroki's fishing knife was sharp and well cared for like all his tools. He hesitated before using it to carefully pry the shell open wider. He didn't want to damage the magnificent creature, even in death. As the shell opened fully, Hiroki's eyes widened in disbelief. There, nestled in what remained of the clam's body, was something that gleamed so brightly in the morning sun that Hiroki had to squint. A pearl, but not just any pearl. This was larger than any he had ever seen or heard of, nearly the size of his fist. It seemed to glow from within, shimmering with colors that shifted as he moved his head. Blue, white, pink, and gold, like a sunrise captured in a perfect sphere. Hiroki's hands shook as he carefully reached into the clam. The pearl was smooth and cool to the touch, heavier than he expected. He cradled it in his palms, unable to believe what he was holding. In all his years on the water, through good catches and bad, through storms and calm seas, nothing had prepared him for this moment. He wrapped the pearl in his clean handkerchief and placed it carefully in the small wooden box where he kept his extra hooks and line. His heart was beating fast, his mind racing with questions. What was such a thing worth? What should he do with it? Who should he tell? For now, though, all he knew was that he needed to get back to shore. The morning's strange pull that had led him to this unfamiliar spot now seemed like more than chance. As he turned the Kasumi toward home, Hiroki felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense that tomorrow might bring something new. The village of Minato appeared on the horizon, the familiar sight of its small harbor and clustered houses, bringing comfort. But Hiroki knew that things were about to change. The weight of the pearl in his box, and the knowledge of what it might mean, felt both exciting and frightening. As he rowed back to shore, his thoughts kept returning to Yua. "You always said the sea would provide," he whispered to the wind. "I just never expected it would provide like this." The morning fishermen were returning as Hiroki reached the harbor. They waved and called greetings, asking about his catch. Hiroki smiled and waved back but said little. Some secrets weren't ready to be shared just yet. He secured his boat and gathered his things, including the small wooden box that now held something that might change everything. Walking up the path to his small house on the hill overlooking the village, Hiroki felt lighter somehow, despite the weight of his discovery. For the first time in 3 years, he found himself eagerly wondering what tomorrow would bring. Hiroki couldn't sleep that night. The pearl sat on his small wooden table, wrapped in the handkerchief, glowing softly, in the moonlight that streamed through his window. Every few minutes he would get up just to look at it again, to make sure it was real and not some dream his old mind had conjured up. His small house felt different somehow. For years after Yua passed, these rooms had felt too empty, too quiet. But tonight, they seemed to buzz with a strange energy. The pearl had brought something new into his life. Uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. When morning finally came, Hiroki made his tea and sat looking at his discovery in the clear light of day. If anything, it was even more beautiful than he remembered. The surface wasn't just white like most pearls he'd seen, but swirled with blues and pinks that shifted as he turned it in his hands. It was heavy too, like a smooth stone that had somehow captured all the colors of the ocean inside it. "What am I going to do with you?" he asked the pearl, as if it might answer. His first thought was to call his children. Takeo would know what to do. He was always practical about such things. And May had friends in the city who knew about valuable things. But something held him back. Not distrust of his children, but a feeling that he needed to understand what he had found before sharing it with anyone. Instead, Hiroki decided to visit old Kenji. Before retiring, Kenji had worked with the pearl divers who had once been common in their region. If anyone in the village would know something about unusual pearls, it would be him. Hiroki carefully rewrapped the pearl and placed it in a small wooden box that had once held Yua's hairpins. He tucked it into his jacket pocket and headed down the hill toward Kenji's house near the harbor. The morning was bright and clear, with seagulls circling above the boats as fishermen prepared for the day. A few nodded to Hiroki as he passed, and he nodded back, trying to appear normal despite the treasure weighing down his pocket. Kenji was in his garden when Hiroki arrived, kneeling painfully as he pulled weeds from around his vegetables. At 78, he was one of the few people in the village older than Hiroki. "You're not on your boat today," Kenji said, looking up with surprise. "Are you finally taking my advice to rest?" Hiroki smiled. "Not exactly. I need your eyes on something, old friend." Kenji's eyebrows rose with curiosity. He stood slowly, his knees cracking in protest, and led Hiroki inside his house. The inside was neat but crowded with mementos from a long life. Photographs of family, odd shells and stones collected from beaches, fishing gear too old to use but too precious to throw away. They sat at Kenji's kitchen table, and Hiroki carefully placed the wooden box between them. "I found something yesterday," Hiroki said, his voice lower than normal despite them being alone. "Something I've never seen before." Kenji leaned forward, his eyes alert with interest. Hiroki opened the box and unwrapped the handkerchief, revealing the pearl. The morning light from Kenji's window caught it perfectly, sending small rainbows across the table. For a long moment, Kenji said nothing. He simply stared, his mouth slightly open. Then, with hands that trembled slightly, he reached for the pearl. "May I?" he asked. Hiroki nodded, and Kenji lifted the pearl carefully, turning it in his weathered hands. "In all my years," Kenji finally whispered, "I have never seen anything like this. Where did you find it?" Hiroki told him about the unusual current, the deep water he rarely visited, and the giant clam that had already died. "This isn't just a pearl," Kenji said when Hiroki finished his story. "This is something else entirely." He handed it back to Hiroki with the care one might use for a newborn. "Do you know what it might be worth?" Hiroki shook his head. "That's why I came to you." Kenji ran a hand through his thin white hair. "I can't tell you that. This is beyond anything I've seen in the pearl markets. But I know someone who might help. My nephew Taro works at the university in the city. He studies marine biology. If anyone can tell you what you found, it would be him." "Can you contact him?" Hiroki asked. "Without telling too many others?" Kenji understood the need for discretion. In a small village like theirs, news traveled faster than the fishing boats. "I'll call him today," Kenji promised. "But Hiroki, something like this, it won't stay secret for long." Hiroki nodded, rewrapping the pearl and returning it to his pocket. As he walked back up the hill to his house, he could feel the weight of it against his chest. Not just its physical weight, but the weight of decision it brought with it. By the afternoon, word had arrived that Kenji's nephew Taro would come to the village the next day. Hiroki spent the evening wondering what tomorrow would bring. He pulled out an old book about pearls that Yua had kept, one with pictures of famous jewels and the stories behind them. None looked anything like what he had found. When sleep finally came, Hiroki dreamed of the sea. In his dream, he was young again, strong and straight-backed, rowing his boat through waters so clear he could see all the way to the bottom. Yua was there too, sitting across from him, smiling in that quiet way of hers. "The sea gives gifts to those who respect it," she said in the dream. When he woke, those words stayed with him, clear as if she had really spoken them. The next morning, Hiroki dressed in his best clothes, not formal wear, but his newest shirt and the pants without patches. He polished his one pair of good shoes and combed his hair neatly. Whatever this day brought, he wanted to face it with dignity. Taro arrived mid-morning, driving a small car that looked out of place on the village's narrow streets. He was younger than Hiroki expected, perhaps in his 30s, with glasses and an eager expression. Kenji made the introductions at his house, where they all gathered around the same kitchen table. Once again, Hiroki revealed the pearl. Taro's reaction was even more dramatic than his uncle's had been. He actually stood up from his chair, leaning over the pearl with wide eyes. "This is extraordinary," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "May I examine it more closely?" Hiroki nodded, and Taro pulled equipment from his bag. A small scale, a magnifying glass, a device Hiroki didn't recognize that shone different colored lights. "I've studied pearls as part of my research on mollusks," Taro explained as he worked. "But this specimen is unprecedented." He looked up at Hiroki. "You said you found this in a giant clam? A tridacna?" Hiroki described the clam again, and Taro nodded, making notes. "Based on your description, it was likely a tridacna gigas, the largest species of clam in the world. They can live for over 100 years. But pearls from these clams are extremely rare, and ones of this size and quality." He shook his head in disbelief. "It's virtually unheard of." "What is it worth?" Kenji asked the question Hiroki was thinking. Taro removed his glasses and polished them, a gesture that seemed to give him time to think. "I couldn't give you an exact figure. This would need to be assessed by experts in gemology. But based on its size, color, and uniqueness, we could be talking about millions." The word hung in the air. Millions. More money than Hiroki had ever imagined having. "What should I do with it?" Hiroki asked quietly. Taro looked thoughtful. "With your permission, I'd like to bring in colleagues, experts who can properly document and authenticate this find. It's not just valuable as a gem, but as a scientific discovery. A pearl of this size and type could tell us new things about how these formations occur in nature." Hiroki nodded slowly. The idea that his find might have scientific importance had never occurred to him. "If you decide to sell it," Taro continued, "and there are museums and collectors who would be very interested. But first we need to establish exactly what you found, and for that we'll need more specialized equipment than I have here." "Will I need to go to the city?" Hiroki asked, thinking of how long it had been since he'd left the village. "Eventually, perhaps. But first, if you agree, I can bring the necessary people and equipment here. It would be better to minimize moving the pearl until we've documented it properly." By the end of their meeting, it was agreed. Taro would return in 3 days with a small team of experts. Until then, Hiroki would keep the pearl safe and tell no one else about it. As he walked Taro to his car, Hiroki felt a strange mix of emotions. Excitement about what he had found, yes, but also a growing sense that his quiet life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. "Your discovery could be quite significant," Taro said as he prepared to leave. "Are you ready for what might come next?" Hiroki looked out toward the sea, which glittered in the afternoon sun. For most of his life, the ocean had been his workplace, his provider, sometimes his adversary. Now it had given him something that might change everything. "I suppose we'll find out," he said with a small smile. As Taro's car disappeared down the road, Hiroki turned toward home, the pearl once again nestled safely in his pocket. 3 days. In 3 days he would learn more about his extraordinary find. Until then, he would keep fishing, keep living his quiet life. But even as he thought this, he knew that quiet life was already slipping away, like a boat drifting from shore on the outgoing tide. The 3 days that followed moved both too quickly and too slowly for Hiroki. During daylight hours, he tried to maintain his normal routine, fixing his nets, checking his boat, even going out for short fishing trips close to shore. But his mind was never fully on his tasks. The pearl, safely hidden in his house, occupied his thoughts constantly. At night, he would take it out and place it on his table, watching how it seemed to glow even in the dim light of his lamp. Sometimes he caught himself talking to it as if the pearl were a visitor in his home. More than once he found himself telling it about Yua, about the children, about the life he had lived on these shores. The pearl listened silently, its surface changing colors as he moved around it. News travels fast in small villages. Though Hiroki had told no one but Kenji about his find, he noticed people watching him with curious eyes when he walked through the village. Kenji had kept his word about discretion, but the unusual visit from his university nephew had not gone unnoticed, nor had Hiroki's absence from his regular fishing spots. "Everything all right with you, Hiroki?" asked Fumiko, who ran the small market where Hiroki bought his rice and tea. Her eyes were kind but curious. "Just getting old," Hiroki replied with a smile. "Some days the sea feels farther away than others." He felt bad about the half-truth, but what could he say? That he had found something that might be worth millions? That experts were coming to his humble house to examine a pearl larger than anyone had seen before? It all seemed too unbelievable, even to him who had held the pearl in his own hands. On the morning of the third day, Hiroki woke before dawn. He cleaned his small house thoroughly, something he hadn't done properly since Yua died. He swept the wooden floors, dusted the photographs of his family that sat on the shelves, and even put fresh flowers in the vase on the kitchen table, wildflowers he'd gathered from the hillside behind his house. By mid-morning, he heard cars coming up the road. More than one, which was unusual for the village. From his window, he watched. As 3 vehicles parked near his house, Taro emerged from the first one, followed by an older man with white hair and a serious expression. From the second car came 2 women, one carrying what looked like camera equipment. The third car held 2 more men who began unloading cases of gear. Hiroki took a deep breath, straightened his shirt, and went to greet them. Taro made the introductions quickly. Professor Nakamura was a marine biologist specializing in giant clams. Dr. Ito was a gemologist from the National Museum. The others were research assistants and photographers, all there to document what Taro had described to them as a find of potentially historic significance. They set up their equipment in Hiroki's main room, transforming the humble space into something that looked like a laboratory from the city. Lights on stands, computers, measuring devices, all focused on the small table where Hiroki carefully placed the wooden box containing the pearl. "Mr. Tanaka," Professor Nakamura said formally, "before we begin, I want to thank you for allowing us this opportunity. Regardless of what we discover today, your willingness to share this find with the scientific community is greatly appreciated." Hiroki nodded, suddenly feeling a lump in his throat. The seriousness with which these educated people were treating his find made it all feel more real somehow. When he unwrapped the pearl, there was a collective gasp from the room. Even though Taro had described it to them, seeing the pearl in person clearly had an impact. Dr. Ito stepped forward first, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "May I?" Hiroki nodded, and she lifted the pearl with gloved hands, placing it carefully on a velvet cloth they had brought. What followed was hours of examination. They photographed the pearl from every angle. They measured its dimensions with precision tools. They weighed it on a digital scale. They shone different lights on it and recorded how it reacted. They took tiny samples from the surface. "Just microscopic amounts," Dr. Ito assured Hiroki. "That won't affect its appearance or value." Throughout it all, they explained what they were doing, treating Hiroki not as a simple fisherman but as a partner in their research. He found himself fascinated by their work, by the careful way they handled his find, by the excitement in their voices as they spoke to each other using terms he didn't understand. During a break, while the researchers were conferring over their computers, Taro sat with Hiroki on the small porch outside. "They're amazed," Taro said quietly. "This isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented. The size alone would make it remarkable, but the coloration and composition..." He shook his head in wonder. "Professor Nakamura thinks the clam must have been extremely old, perhaps over 100 years. "Older than me," Hiroki said with a small smile. "Much older," Taro agreed. "And the conditions needed to create a pearl like this? They're trying to understand it now. It might help us learn more about how the ocean is changing." By late afternoon, the team had finished their initial examinations. They gathered around Hiroki at his kitchen table, their faces serious but excited. "Mr. Tanaka," Professor Nakamura began, "what you have found is, without exaggeration, the largest natural pearl ever documented. Its size alone would make it extremely valuable, but its composition and coloration make it truly unique." Dr. Ito continued, "Based on our preliminary analysis, we believe this pearl could be valued at approximately $4 to $5 million. The number hung in the air. Hiroki felt his hands grip the edge of the table. It was more money than he had ever imagined. However, Dr. Ito added, its scientific value may be even greater. This pearl contains elements that could help us understand ocean acidification and climate patterns over the past century. For researchers, it's an invaluable window into the past." "What happens now?" Hiroki asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Professor Nakamura leaned forward. "That depends on you, Mr. Tanaka. As the finder, the pearl is legally yours. You could sell it to a private collector or auction house. Or," he hesitated, "you could consider allowing it to be studied further and perhaps eventually displayed in a museum, where it could benefit scientific research and be seen by the public. The National Museum would be very interested in acquiring it," Dr. Ito added. "We couldn't match what a private collector might pay, but we could offer a substantial sum, along with the knowledge that it would be preserved for future generations." Hiroki looked at the pearl, now back in its velvet cloth on his table. In just a few days, it had transformed from an unexpected find to something that might change not just his life, but perhaps contribute to important research. "I need time to think," he said finally. They understood. After packing up their equipment and promising to send him their formal findings, the team left. Taro was the last to go, shaking Hiroki's hand firmly. "Whatever you decide," he said, "your discovery is remarkable. You should be proud." As the cars drove away, villagers who had been watching curiously from a distance began to approach. The presence of so many outsiders with scientific equipment had not gone unnoticed. Kenji was the first to reach Hiroki's porch. "So," the old man said, "it seems your find is significant after all." Hiroki nodded, suddenly feeling very tired. "More than I imagined." "Will you tell us what's happening?" asked Fumiko from the market, who had joined the small group gathering. Looking at their familiar faces, people he had known all his life, people who had supported him after Yua died, people who worried about him going out alone in his boat, Hiroki knew he couldn't keep his secret any longer. "Come in," he said, opening his door wider. "I'll make tea and I'll tell you everything." That evening, Hiroki's small house was fuller than it had been in years. Neighbors crowded around his table as he showed them the pearl and told them what the scientists had said. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to joy, but all of them seemed genuinely happy for him. "What will you do with all that money?" someone asked. It was the question Hiroki had been asking himself since the researchers left. $4 or $5 million was more than he could comprehend. He had lived simply all his life. What would he do with such wealth? As the neighbors eventually left, each offering congratulations and, in some cases, unsolicited advice about how to spend his newfound fortune, Hiroki found himself alone again with the pearl. He sat at his table long into the night, thinking about Yua, about his children and grandchildren, about the village, about the sea that had provided for him all these years. By morning, as the first light of dawn touched the water he could see from his window, Hiroki had made his decision. He picked up the phone to call his children. It was time to tell them about the pearl and about what he planned to do with it. But first, he would go out in his boat one more time, to the spot where he had found the giant clam. He needed to thank the sea for its unexpected gift and to ask it, in his own way, what it might want in return. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with just enough breeze to ruffle the surface of the sea. Hiroki rose early, as he always did. But today felt different. Before calling his children, before telling anyone else about his decision, he needed to return to the place where everything had changed. He packed a small lunch, tucked the pearl safely into his jacket pocket, and headed down to the harbor. A few other fishermen were already preparing their boats, and they called greetings to him. News of his find had spread through the entire village by now, and Hiroki could feel their curious glances. "Good morning," he called back, trying to act normal despite the weight in his pocket. "Heading out today, Hiroki?" asked old Daisuke, who was mending a net on the dock. "Thought you might be too busy counting your millions." He laughed good-naturedly. "Oh, sea doesn't wait for rich or poor," Hiroki replied with a smile. It was something his father used to say. He untied the kasumi and pushed off from the dock, feeling the familiar sway beneath his feet. The wooden boat had carried him safely for decades through calm waters and storms alike. As he rowed away from the harbor, Hiroki realized how much he would miss this. The rhythm of the oars, the sound of water lapping against the hull, the gradual distancing from land and all its complications. It took him longer than expected to find the exact spot where he had discovered the giant clam. The currents had shifted again, and he had to rely on landmarks on the distant shore to guide him. When he finally reached the area, he let the boat drift, watching the water's surface as if it might offer some sign. Hiroki took the pearl from his pocket and held it up to the sunlight. Out here on the open water, it seemed even more magical, catching the light and reflecting it back in swirls of blue and white. He thought about all that had happened in the few days since he had found it. The scientists with their equipment, the neighbors with their questions, the sudden possibility of wealth beyond anything he had imagined. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he asked the pearl quietly. Of course, it didn't answer. But sitting there in his boat, surrounded by the sea that had been his life's companion, Hiroki felt a growing clarity about what should happen next. He stayed out on the water for hours, thinking about his life and what might lie ahead. By the time he turned back toward shore, the sun was high overhead and his decision was made. When he returned to the harbor, Hiroki wasn't surprised to see Takeo's car parked near his house. His son had always been quick to act. Hiroki had barely finished his brief phone call, "I found something important, you should come," before Takeo had promised to drive down immediately from the city. As Hiroki secured his boat, he could see two figures waiting on his porch, Takeo and unexpectedly his daughter May as well. His heart lifted at the sight of them both. It had been months since they were all together. "Dad," May called, hurrying down to the dock to meet him. At 35, she still moved with the same eager energy she had possessed as a child. She embraced him tightly. "We've been so worried. The neighbors told us all sorts of wild stories." "Not as wild as you might think," Hiroki said, hugging her back. Takeo approached more slowly. At 40, he looked so much like Hiroki had at that age. The same serious eyes, the same careful way of moving. "Father," he said with a formal bow that quickly melted into a warm embrace. "What's this about a giant pearl?" Hiroki looked around at the curious onlookers beginning to gather. "Let's talk inside," he said. Once in the house, with tea prepared and served in Yua's old cups, Hiroki placed the wooden box on the table between them. His children watched with curious expressions as he opened it and unwrapped the handkerchief. The pearl caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, sending small rainbows dancing across the walls. May gasped. Takeo leaned forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Is it real?" Takeo asked. "Very real," Hiroki confirmed. "Scientists from the university confirmed it yesterday. They say it's the largest natural pearl ever found." "How much is it worth?" May asked, reaching out tentatively to touch its smooth surface. "They estimate between $4 and $5 million. The number hung in the air between them. Takeo sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture so like his mother's that it made Hiroki's heart ache a little. "Father, that's life-changing money," Takeo said finally. "It is," Hiroki agreed. "That's why I wanted you both here. I've made a decision about what to do with it, but I wanted to talk to you first." His children exchanged glances. Hiroki had always been independent, sometimes stubbornly so. That he wanted their input now showed how seriously he was taking this. The scientists say the pearl has scientific value too, Hiroki continued. Something about studying ocean conditions and climate patterns. They suggested it could go to the National Museum. Would they pay you for it? Takeo asked, always practical. Not as much as a private buyer would. But yes, they would pay. What are you thinking, Dad? May asked softly. Hiroki took a deep breath. I'm thinking that this pearl came from the sea and in some way it should give back to the sea. He explained the plan that had formed during his hours on the water that morning. He would sell the pearl to the National Museum, but with conditions. A large portion of the money would establish a foundation focused on ocean conservation and sustainable fishing practices. The foundation would be based right here in the village, bringing jobs and research opportunities to the community that had been his home all his life. The sea has provided for us for generations, Hiroki said. Now it's given us this gift. I think we should use it to protect what we've been given. Takeo looked thoughtful. It's a noble idea, Father. But what about your future? Your retirement? You've worked hard all your life. Hiroki smiled. I'm not giving it all away. I've thought about that too. Some of the money will be for us, for you two, for the grandchildren's education, and yes, for me to live comfortably. But I don't need millions to be happy. I never have. May's eyes were shining. I think it's a wonderful idea. Mom would have loved it. She would, wouldn't she? Hiroki said softly, thinking of Yua's love for the sea and all living things. She always said we borrow the earth from our grandchildren. This is a way to give something back to them. They talked late into the evening, refining the idea, discussing details. Takeo, with his business experience, had practical suggestions about setting up a foundation. May, who worked in education, had ideas about how the foundation could involve local schools and create programs for children. As night fell, Hiroki felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. His modest house was filled with the voices of his children, with plans and possibilities. The pearl sat on the table throughout their discussion, catching the lamplight, a silent participant in the future it was helping to create. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Taro returned with representatives from the National Museum who were enthusiastic about Hiroki's proposal. Lawyers were consulted about the foundation. The village buzzed with excitement as news spread. Hiroki insisted on one condition that surprised everyone. The pearl would be displayed with a simple plaque, acknowledging not him, but the sea it came from and the village where generations of fishermen had lived in harmony with the ocean. But it should have your name too, the museum director argued. You found it. You're making this generous gesture. Hiroki shook his head. I was just in the right place at the right time. The pearl belongs to the sea, and now it will help protect the sea for the future. 10 days after Hiroki had pulled the giant clam into his boat, he stood on the steps of the village hall with his family beside him. Before him gathered not just his neighbors, but reporters, officials from the National Museum, and even a representative from the government's environmental agency. Cameras flashed as Hiroki formally signed the agreement, transferring ownership of the pearl to the museum and establishing the Ocean Heritage Foundation. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote his name, not from age but from the emotion of the moment. Mr. Tanaka, a reporter called out, how does it feel to give away a fortune? Hiroki considered the question. The pearl, now securely held by museum staff, would soon be on its way to the city. But something of it would always remain here, in the foundation that would bear its name in the future. It would help create for the village and the sea. I'm not giving away a fortune, he said finally. I'm investing in something priceless, the ocean that has given us life. Some treasures aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be shared. As the crowd applauded, Hiroki looked out toward the harbor where his small boat waited. Tomorrow he would go fishing again, as he had done nearly every day of his adult life. But now each time he set out on the water, he would carry with him the knowledge that his unexpected find would help preserve the sea for generations to come. And that, he thought, was worth more than all the pearls in the ocean. 1 year had passed since Hiroki found the pearl, and the small fishing village of Minato had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The Ocean Heritage Foundation, housed in a modest building near the harbor, had brought new life to the community. Hiroki stood at the edge of the dock, watching a group of school children board a small research boat. They wore bright orange life vests and chattered excitedly as young scientists from the university helped them aboard. These weekly Sea Explorer trips had become the highlight for children from schools all along the coast. "All ready for today's expedition, Mr. Tanaka?" called Yuki, a marine biologist who had moved to the village 6 months ago to work with the foundation. Hiroki nodded, smiling at the children's enthusiasm. "Perfect weather for it," he replied, looking up at the clear blue sky. At 73, Hiroki still went fishing several times a week, but his routine had expanded to include regular visits to the foundation and occasional trips to the city. His life had found a new rhythm, one that honored the old while embracing unexpected changes. The foundation had grown faster than anyone anticipated. The story of the pearl, now known worldwide as the ocean's heart, had captured public imagination. Additional donations had poured in from environmental groups, businesses, and private citizens moved by Hiroki's decision to give back to the sea. Hiroki made his way along the harbor to where his boat, the Kasumi, was tied. Unlike before, it was no longer the only boat in his life. The foundation now operated 3 research vessels, including the largest one, named Yua's Dream, in honor of his late wife. But Hiroki still preferred his old wooden boat for his personal fishing trips. "Heading out, Father?" Takeo approached from the foundation building, a tablet in his hand. After the foundation was established, Takeo had surprised everyone by announcing he was leaving his corporate job in the city to become the foundation's director. "The perfect fit," he had called it, "of business skills and family legacy." "Just for the morning," Hiroki replied. "Will you join me?" Takeo looked at his tablet, with its calendar full of meetings and calls. Then he smiled and put it away in his pocket. "I think the foundation can survive without me for a few hours." Together they prepared the boat and pushed off from the dock. Hiroki handed the oars to his son, watching with quiet pride as Takeo rowed with strong, sure strokes. In the past year, father and son had spent more time together than they had in the previous 20 years. They had rediscovered each other, finding common ground in their shared love for the sea and their commitment to the foundation's work. As they moved away from the shore, Hiroki looked back at the village. New solar panels glinted on several rooftops, another foundation initiative to help the community reduce its environmental impact. The old fish processing plant, which had stood abandoned for years, was now renovated as a research facility where scientists studied marine ecosystems and sustainable fishing practices. "Did you see the latest data from the Coral Reef Monitoring Program?" Takeo asked as they reached their favorite fishing spot. "The protected area is showing real signs of recovery." Hiroki nodded. The creation of a marine protected area had been one of the foundation's first accomplishments, setting aside a section of the coast where fishing was prohibited to allow marine life to regenerate. Initially, some local fishermen had resisted the idea, but Hiroki's support had been crucial in winning them over. "Kenji told me he caught more fish yesterday than he has in years," Hiroki said. "And he was fishing just at the edge of the protected zone, exactly as the scientists suggested." They cast their lines in comfortable silence, the gentle rocking of the boat as familiar to them both as the beating of their own hearts. After a while, Takeo spoke again. "The museum called yesterday. The pearl exhibit is their most popular attraction. People from all over the world come to see it." Hiroki smiled. The pearl was displayed in a special room designed to mimic the ocean environment where it had formed. Videos told the story of its discovery and the foundation it had inspired. Beside it, a live feed showed the protected marine area near Minato, connecting visitors directly to the conservation work their admission fees helped support. "And May called this morning," Takeo continued. "The educational program she developed about ocean conservation has been adopted by schools across the country. She's been invited to present it at an international conference next month." Pride swelled in Hiroki's chest. His daughter had found her calling in developing the foundation's educational initiatives, creating programs that connected children to the ocean and taught them about protecting it for the future. Their peaceful fishing was interrupted by the sound of a boat engine. Looking up, they saw the Foundation's smallest research vessel approaching. Taro waved from the helm. "I thought I might find you two out here," he called as he maneuvered alongside them. In the past year, Taro had become the Foundation's lead scientist, dividing his time between field research and university teaching. "We just got the water quality results back from the northern testing sites. The improvement is remarkable. The new waste management systems in the upriver communities are really making a difference." Hiroki listened as Taro and Takeo discussed the technical details. A year ago, such conversation would have gone over his head, but now he followed along, easily, having absorbed more scientific knowledge than he ever thought possible at his age. "Will you come to the community dinner tonight, Hiroki?" Taro asked. "The governor is attending. He wants to discuss expanding our model to other coastal villages." "I'll be there," Hiroki promised. After Taro departed, Hiroki and Takeo caught several fish, enough for dinner but no more than they needed. The Foundation had helped local fishermen adopt more sustainable practices, and Hiroki led by example. On their way back to shore, they passed the spot where Hiroki had found the giant clam a year before. They always paused here, a moment of silent acknowledgement of the twist of fate that had changed everything. "Do you ever regret it, Father?" Takeo asked quietly. "Giving away the pearl? You could have kept the money, lived a life of luxury." Hiroki looked out at the horizon, where the blue of the sea met the blue of the sky. "Not for a single moment," he said truthfully. "What would I have done with all that money for myself? Buy a bigger house? A faster boat? New clothes?" He shook his head. "I've lived my whole life with just what I needed. Having more things wouldn't have made me happier." He gestured toward the shore where the Foundation building stood. "But this, seeing our village thrive, watching the ocean grow healthier, knowing that children will learn to love and protect the sea, this brings a kind of happiness I never expected to find at my age." That evening, the community center was filled with people, villagers, scientists, government officials, and reporters. The governor gave a speech praising the Foundation's work and announcing a new partnership to extend its programs to other coastal communities. Photographs of marine life from the protected area were displayed on the walls, showing the remarkable recovery that had occurred in just 1 year. Hiroki sat at a table with Takeo and Mei, surrounded by friends old and new. His grandchildren ran around with other local children, their faces painted with colorful fish designs. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter. As dinner was served, locally caught fish prepared with traditional recipes, the lights dimmed slightly. A screen lowered from the ceiling and a live video connection appeared. On the screen was a familiar face, the director of the National Museum. "Good evening, friends," she said, her voice filling the room. "We're connecting live from the Ocean's Heart exhibit in Tokyo, where we have a special announcement." The camera panned to show the pearl in its display case, glowing softly under carefully designed lighting. Beside it stood a government official in a formal suit. "Today, UNESCO has officially recognized the Ocean's Heart pearl as a natural world treasure," the official announced. "But more importantly, the Ocean Heritage Foundation model of community-based marine conservation has been recognized as a global best practice to be promoted worldwide." Applause filled the community center. Hiroki felt Takeo's hand on his shoulder, saw tears of pride in Mei's eyes. Later that night, after the celebration had ended, and Hiroki walked home under a sky filled with stars, he stopped to look out at the dark shape of the ocean. The sound of waves against the shore was the same one that had accompanied his entire life, a constant in a world that had changed so dramatically. His small house welcomed him with familiar comfort. Inside, he went to the shelf where he kept his most treasured possessions. Photographs of Yua, of their children and grandchildren, and now a small glass model of the pearl, given to him by the museum as a token of appreciation. Next to these sat a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from a fisherman in the Philippines who had created a conservation program in his own community, inspired by Hiroki's story. You showed us that one person can make a difference, the letter said. That it's never too late to give back, to the sea that has given us so much. As Hiroki prepared for bed, he thought about the strange journey of the past year, from a simple fisherman to the founder of a conservation movement that was spreading across the world, from a solitary life focused on daily survival to a community effort to protect the future. He had never sought fame or recognition. He had simply followed what felt right in his heart, to honor the sea that had sustained him, to protect it for generations to come. And somehow that simple decision had created ripples that continued to spread, like circles in water when a stone is dropped. Tomorrow, he would go fishing again. The sea was still his first love, his most constant companion. But now, when he returned to shore, he would bring not just fish for his table, but observations for the scientists, knowledge for the foundation, and stories for his grandchildren, the next generation of ocean guardians. As sleep came to him, Hiroki smiled. The greatest treasure the sea had given him wasn't the pearl at all. It was the chance in his final years to give something meaningful back to the world, a legacy that would live long after he was gone.